It's on crypto. It's on something that you've been asked questions everywhere, and I think it's quite possible that a lot of people in this room have also invested in cryptocurrencies. In fact, I'm quite sure that many people in this room have invested in cryptocurrencies. What is your thinking in terms of cryptocurrencies? I know there is a law, so I'm not asking you for specifics. From the point of view of a sovereign cryptocurrency or a sovereign virtual currency, and from the point of view of the unregulated private currencies, many of which are now being speculated on, traded on. So what's your view on cryptocurrencies? Should we have one, a sovereign cryptocurrency? And what's your view on regulating private cryptocurrencies?
The one luxury that a minister doesn't have is for her to answer questions of this nature when the parliament is in session. So you will pardon me for that. There is certainly a well consulted bill which is coming through. Once the cabinet clears it, it will certainly come into the parliament. On the floor of the House, with questions being asked by members, some answers were given. And even there, I had reminded the members saying I may not be able to get into the details of it. They have to wait for the bill to come. I would think that's the answer I will be expected to give even outside of the House.
Do you think there is a lot of unregulated speculation that's happening in
100%. Yes, there is a lot of speculation.
And do you think that's healthy?
That's not healthy at all.
And, but will there be adequate safeguards to ensure that people who've invested in them don't get their fingers burnt in case there is a law, which sort of, or in case there's regulation?
Well, that the parliament will have to decide on it. The parliament will have to decide.
I was just trying to make sure that the people who've invested in cryptocurrencies, their money is safe. We've made certain, slightly more macro question, we've made certain commitments in Glasgow regarding the climate, and necessary commitments, I think, very responsible commitments, much more than many of the first world countries did. But there is an economic impact to this. GDP, most of these countries, if you look at it, many of the rich countries grew their economies strongly on the basis of traditional fuels. So the carbon intensity of GDP growth for them in their glory years was very, very high. Whereas we are now in a position where we have to cut the carbon intensity of GDP growth going forward. What kind of scenario planning has the Finance Ministry done in terms of how our long-term growth is likely to be given these commitments that we've made?
No, the commitments have been made by the Honorable Prime Minister after quite a lot of consultation within the government. And the commitments were made also realizing the level at which, or the stage of development at which we are. And that is one of the reasons you will see that we have not really gone all the way down the road to say my thermal energy production will be completely phased out. We have not said that, because our dependence on coal, particularly because the base level of energy production depends on coal, and that cannot be replaced through solar or wind or anything else. So that without that base, any incremental addition which is being made cannot be made, and that base has to be stable, for which you need something like the thermal production, probably efficient and minimum climate damage type of production using coal has to be continuously worked on, and therefore we have not excluded ourselves completely out of the coal usage for energy production. However, modern technology will have to be used so that emissions are limited, and for which the thermal plants, in fact, I remember saying it in my July 2019 budget, that legacy old-time thermal units will be shut down. And post that, we are also looking at making sure we bring in that kind of technology which will make energy production, thermal energy production, a lot more climate friendly. But you must have read, and I'm sure you've also covered it, that in the last 2-3 days we've got to know that the total power generated in this country is now 45% coming from non-fossil fuel generating units, which means the transition to non-fossil fuel based and somewhat renewable energy. In fact, all renewable energy, not just solar, hydro, all of them have come to be 45%, which is gradual shift has brought us this distinct change in the way in which energy is produced in this country. So the transition is going through a well-planned traction and trajectory. So the commitments given by the Prime Minister as regards by 2030 we achieve this, we achieve that, will be achieved because the planning has been very careful, meticulous, without upsetting the economy as it is in a very critical stage of development. But the long-term goals will consume a lot more investment, for which we'll have to generate more resources. We'll have to invest a lot more for that.
Just to clarify, so you're saying that doesn't affect growth, but it means that we will have to spend more for growth.
Doesn't affect growth in the medium term, but we will have to invest more for the long term, which will have to be climate friendly.
I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask, which have come from the audience. And thank you. One of these is about, from one of my colleagues, so there's no point in naming him. Do you agree that supply side issues and Omicron are underlying threats to the economy at this point in time? Omicron, yes, but supply side issues you think would be
No, even Omicron, I would want to say it's not a threat. If a country is very clear about vaccination, and we've achieved 1.25 billion already vaccination, and we are still going ahead in that kind of a speed. To a large extent, you're consciously making sure that the people are now being given that immunity through the vaccination. Nevertheless, we'll still have to follow the protocol and be careful and everything else. So I don't want to take it as a threat. We will have to keep it as a challenge for which we'll have to be careful. So with the supply side.
Question specifically taking off from the point you made about ease of doing business by Lokesh Arora on Haryana's reservation law, saying these laws seem to be against the principle of making it easier for companies to do business. What's your view?
I am not sure what the local compulsions were for the Haryana government to do it. So I would want to know what is the kind of issue which has arisen there. Even with ease of doing business, I think sometimes it is important for states also to take cognizance of what is developing locally. So I need to know more on that.